My own son destroyed me with a single signature. One cold flick of his hand, and decades of my work, my loyalty, my sleepless nights evaporated. Nobody warned me. Nobody prepared me. They just announced it like reading the weather forecast. I sat in the boardroom, the same room where I had closed contracts worth hundreds of millions, and listened while my role was handed to him. My son, Thomas Mercer. The same boy I once carried on my hip, spoon-fed, walked to school. Now he looked at me across the polished oak table like I was an outdated filing cabinet that needed to be shoved into storage. Behind the glass wall, I caught the smirks of a few younger staffers. For them I was a fading legend. For him, I was just a 60-year-old woman ready to be erased from the company's story. Dead weight. Something to push aside so his new era could begin. It was betrayal. Not from a rival, not from an enemy, but from my own son. He gained everything: power, the title of CEO, applause from the board. And I was left with silence that cut sharper than words. But let me back up for a moment. My name is Diana Mercer. I built Mercer Hart Consulting with my late husband, Richard. We started in a cramped one-room office above a hardware store 35 years ago. I wrote contracts by hand, worked 16-hour days, begged banks for lines of credit, and convinced skeptical executives to take chances on us. I know every screw in the foundation of this company, every client list, every supplier, every loophole in every agreement. And still they told me with rehearsed smiles that it was time for fresh leadership. Michael Gray, our vice president turned acting chairman, did the talking. Diana, you've given this company everything. But now is the moment to pass the torch. His voice oozed corporate charm, the kind that sounds polite but feels like poison. Then he announced it. Effective immediately, Thomas Mercer will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. Applause erupted. A dozen well-dressed men and women clapping for my son, as if he just rescued the company instead of hijacking it. Thomas smiled. My smile mirrored back at me, but colder, sharper. I stayed seated, hands folded, heart steady. I wasn't going to give them the drama they wanted. Not a tear. Not an outburst. Instead, I watched. I noted every detail. The smug glance from Gray, the half-bow of respect from Thomas, the way the minutes were typed instantly into the official record. Every gesture was ammunition. They thought I'd walk away quietly. They thought I'd retire into some silent corner of suburbia. They thought wrong. I collected my bag, rose from the chair and walked out of that glass box. To them it looked like surrender. To me it was reconnaissance. I didn't speak a word, but in that silence I made a promise. This was not the end. This was the beginning. And none of them, not Michael, not the board, not even Thomas, had the faintest idea what was coming next. When you spend decades building something, you start to believe it can't be taken away. You think contracts, profits, and office towers will keep you safe. But permanence is a lie. I learned that the second I stepped out of the boardroom. I am Diana Mercer, 60 years old, widow, founder, strategist, survivor. My fingerprints are on every deal Mercer Hart ever closed. I negotiated our first $5 million contract in a second-hand suit, while my husband Richard took notes on a yellow legal pad. That deal paid for our first office and the first 5 employees who trusted us with their paychecks. By the time my son Thomas was 10, I was juggling motherhood with late-night calls to London, Tokyo, and New York. I remember tucking him into bed and whispering, "One day, all of this will be yours." I meant it. But I never thought he would take it like this, snatching it out of my hands with the help of men who only ever wrote on my work. I gave up birthdays, holidays, vacations. Richard and I poured every dollar into expansion. When he died 15 years ago, people assumed I'd step back. Instead, I pushed harder. I grew this firm into a $2 billion empire. I was the one who brought in Helios Energy, the crown jewel client, the contract that kept us at the top of the food chain. And yet when the board looked at me last week, they didn't see a founder, a leader, or a strategist. They saw an age. 60. A number to be phased out. I packed up my office in one box. A framed photo of Richard. My favorite fountain pens. A collection of old leather notebooks filled with scrawled notes from every negotiation, every loophole, every crisis. Those notebooks weighed more than the box. They were my real assets. The hallways felt colder that day. Younger staff avoided eye contact, whispering in corners. A junior analyst muttered, "Sorry, Mrs. Mercer," as I passed. Sorry. Like they were watching a funeral. At the lobby, the security guard I'd hired 15 years ago shook his head. "End of an era," he said. I gave him a polite smile, but inside gears were already turning. That night, I sat alone in my condo. The city lights glowed across the skyline. Towers filled with offices where people still believed their jobs would last forever. The box from my office sat on my kitchen table. I poured a drink, opened one of the notebooks and flipped through the pages. Contracts, amendments, compliance clauses, renewal dates. All the little threads that kept the machine together. Without me, Thomas was sitting on a throne made of glass. One wrong move and it would shatter under him. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I just circled one date in a contract, underlined one clause and leaned back in my chair. The plan wasn't complete yet. But I had the first piece. They thought I would fade quietly into retirement. What they didn't understand was that my name, Diana Mercer, still carried weight. Especially with the people who actually signed the checks. And the first call I was going to make. Let's just say it had the potential to rip hundreds of millions out of Mercer and Hart's hands in a single move. The morning after my removal, the company newsletter hit every inbox at 7 a.m. sharp. Mercer and Hart welcomes new era of leadership. My name wasn't even on the first page. A single paragraph buried near the bottom. We thank Diana Mercer for her years of service and wish her well in retirement. Retirement. As if I had asked for it. Inside headquarters, the mood was electric. Staff crowded the break rooms congratulating Thomas. Finally, some fresh energy. One of the analysts whispered as he poured burnt coffee into a paper cup. They had no idea how fragile their new era really was. Thomas walked the hallways like a conquering hero. Perfect suit, tie clipped just right, shaking hands like he'd won an election. Every smile was rehearsed. Every line. We're moving forward. We'll set new records. This is our future. Sounded like he'd practiced in front of a mirror. I watched from a distance, slipping in one last time to clear the rest of my files. Nobody stopped me. Nobody dared. A few employees looked away guilty. Others just nodded politely, already pretending I was history. Michael Gray was never far from Thomas's side. The vice president turned kingmaker. He played the role of mentor, whispering in my son's ear, guiding him through every handshake. Gray had been circling my chair for years, waiting for the day I would weaken. He didn't have the vision or the stamina to run the company himself, so he picked the easiest vessel, Thomas. I caught their reflection in the glass wall of the boardroom as I carried out my last box. Gray leaned toward Thomas, smirking. Thomas laughed too loudly, a nervous echo of authority he didn't actually have. It was almost comical. Almost. But what made my stomach tighten wasn't their arrogance. It was the board's silence. They all played along. Nods, applause, polite smiles. They were betting on my son like he was a racehorse, forgetting who had trained him, who had built the track, who had fed the stable. By noon, Thomas was standing at the front of the auditorium, giving his first speech as CEO. I listened from the back of the room. We are stronger than ever, he declared. We're expanding into new markets, taking bold risks, breaking old habits. He said breaking old habits, and let his eyes linger on me for just a second. A calculated jab. The crowd laughed politely. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him, memorizing every word, every gesture. My son thought he was writing the opening chapter of his reign. What he didn't realize was that his lines were being etched into a trap he'd built for himself. After the applause, he strutted down from the stage, stopping to shake more hands. Michael Gray clapped him on the shoulder. Perfect, I heard him say. Exactly what we needed. Needed? They needed cash flow, loyalty, and stability. None of which Thomas could secure without me. I left the building without speaking to anyone. Outside, the city was loud, taxis screaming down the avenue, traders shouting into phones, the usual chaos. But in my head it was silent, cold, focused. Because while they celebrated their victory, I was already flipping through contracts in my mind. Dates, clauses, signatures. I knew exactly where to hit them. Not with drama. Not with screaming. With precision. And the first sign came faster than even I expected. That evening, I got a message from a familiar name. A name that carried more weight than every hand Thomas had shaken that morning. It was short. It was polite. But it was enough to change the game before his first week as CEO had even ended. The box from my office sat on the passenger seat as I drove home. A framed photo of Richard, a few pens, and those leather notebooks. 35 years of my life reduced to a cardboard square. Every red light on the drive felt like another reminder. I was no longer welcome in the building I had built. At home, I placed the box on the kitchen table. My condo was quiet, too quiet. No buzzing phones, no assistants hovering, no back-to-back meetings. Just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like exile. I poured a glass of whiskey and pulled the top notebook closer. Pages filled with scribbles, numbers, contract clauses, reminders. I flipped to one particular section, Helios Energy, our biggest client. The account that generated nearly $500 million in annual revenue. The deal I had personally negotiated after 3 sleepless months of phone calls and travel. I read through my notes, performance requirements, compliance audits, penalty clauses. Every line was burned into my memory. Without me managing it, the account was a live grenade sitting in Thomas's hands. He didn't even know he was holding the pin. The sound of my phone buzzing snapped me out of the thought. A message. The sender's name made me sit up straight. Martin Keller, CEO of Helios Energy. I hadn't spoken to him directly in almost a year. Most communication went through my office. But there it was, his name on my screen. Short message. No small talk. Just a question. I heard about the leadership change. Are you available to meet? I stared at the words, my glass halfway to my lips. A dozen scenarios ran through my head. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he wanted reassurance. Maybe he was ready to pull the plug. Whatever the reason, he wasn't asking Thomas. He wasn't asking Michael Gray. He was asking me. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I leaned back, the phone resting on the table, and let the weight of the moment sink in. This was the first crack in their empire. One message. That's all it took. I looked at Richard's photo propped against the wall. He used to say, business isn't about the contract, it's about the trust behind it. Martin trusted me. Not my son. Not Gray. Me. I finally typed a response. Kept it simple. Professional. Non-committal. Yes. Let me know when and where. Then I closed the notebook, set the glass aside, and sat there in the kitchen staring at the city skyline. They thought they had buried me. They thought I was done. But the CEO of our largest client had just bypassed their shiny new regime and come straight to me. The game had shifted. Quietly. Subtly. But it had shifted. And if Thomas thought his first week as CEO was going to be a honeymoon, he was about to learn what it feels like when the floor gives way beneath your feet. 2 days later, I walked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown. The kind of place where the carpets silence every footstep, and the chandeliers remind you how much money is at stake. Martin Keller was already there, seated in a corner booth of the lounge, his tie loosened but posture sharp. He stood when he saw me. Diana. No handshake yet, just a measured look. His eyes had always been like scanners reading people down to the bone. Martin, I said, sliding into the booth. You don't usually request private meetings. He exhaled through his nose. I don't usually have reason to. A server appeared, hovering for orders. Martin waved him off with a curt gesture. This wasn't a lunch. This was business stripped to the core. I'll be direct, he said, leaning forward. I heard about Thomas. You and the rest of the city, I replied, keeping my tone flat. Martin's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He's ambitious, but he doesn't know the ground he's standing on. I said nothing. Silence has power. Let the other side talk. Martin drummed his fingers against the table. When we signed with Mercer Hart, it was because of you. Not the board. Not your husband, may he rest in peace. You delivered what you promised. Every time. That was the job, I said. No, he countered. That was trust. And trust doesn't transfer just because a nameplate changes on the door. For the first time since my removal, I felt it, a crack of validation. He wasn't here out of courtesy. He was here because the foundation of his billion-dollar projects depended on me. What are you asking, Martin? I finally said. He looked around the room, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then he lowered his voice. I need to know if you're still available. The word hung between us. Available. It meant more than just consultation. It meant loyalty. It meant leverage. I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in the tension. Then I leaned in, meeting his eyes. Let's just say I'm not done working. Martin nodded once, decisive. Good. Because if Thomas expects me to entrust him with $500 million in infrastructure, he's mistaken. My board already has questions. If you're in, we can talk. Quietly. I felt the shift like a current in the room. This was no longer a conversation. It was an alignment. Martin checked his watch, stood, and straightened his jacket. I'll have my assistant set up a formal discussion. Off the record. For now. And then he added the words that would echo in my head long after he left. Don't make me regret this, Diana. If you're back in play, you better be ready to win. He walked out, leaving me alone in the booth. My glass of water sat untouched. My pulse was steady, but inside calculations were firing like a machine. They had stripped me of my title. But in one quiet meeting, I had just taken back the only thing that ever mattered, control of the money. George Miller hadn't aged well. When I spotted him at the small cafe on 48th Street, I almost walked past him. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes, the sharp, calculating eyes of a man who once kept our entire financial engine humming, were still there. He stood as I approached. "Diana," he said, his voice gravelly. "It's been too long." "Not long enough," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "But you're still drinking that sludge they call coffee?" He cracked a smile. "Old habits." George had been our CFO for 20 years. He retired 5 years ago after a brutal heart attack, swearing he'd never touch another balance sheet again. But I knew better. A man like George never stops running the numbers in his head. We traded pleasantries for a few minutes, the kind of small talk that masks what both parties really want. Finally, I cut through it. "I need information, George." His smile faded. "Information about what?" "About Mercer and Hart. About Thomas. About how much rope they actually have before they hang themselves." George leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I figured that's why you called. I still have friends inside. People who owe me favors. But you need to be careful. Gray's got his claws deep in that board now. They're not just protecting Thomas, they're protecting themselves." "Tell me something I don't know." George studied me as if weighing whether I was serious. "You're not just looking for gossip. You're building something." I didn't deny it. He sighed. "All right. Off the record. They're over-leveraged. Expansion loans, aggressive stock buybacks. All to make Thomas's leadership look like a miracle. On paper it's impressive. In reality, it's a house of cards." I leaned forward. "How long until it collapses?" "Depends," George said. "If Helios Energy renews their contract, Thomas looks like a genius. If Helios walks, the lenders panic. The stock tanks. The board will eat him alive." Helios again. Everything came back to that one client. Which meant Martin Keller had just handed me the detonator. George lowered his voice. "There's more. They've been cooking timelines in the compliance reports. Stretching deadlines, burying late fees, hiding penalties. If a client were to, say, request an independent audit." I cut him off with a raised hand. "That's enough." He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "Diana, what are you planning?" I didn't answer. Instead, I finished my coffee, placed a 20 on the table and slid out of the booth. At the door, I turned back. "Thank you, George. You may have just given me exactly what I needed." He called after me, voice low but urgent. "Be careful. They'll come for you if they think you're a threat." I gave him a thin smile. Then they'd better hope I never decide to be one. Outside, the city roared as usual, horns, footsteps, the hum of power. But in my pocket, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Another name. Another opportunity. And just like that, the war I hadn't asked for was officially underway. Back in my condo, I spread the notebooks across the kitchen table like a general preparing for battle. Pages of cramped handwriting, clipped memos, copies of contracts. I had built a paper trail so detailed it could tell the company's history better than any official archive. I flipped to the Helios Energy file. Compliance deadlines, delivery schedules, payment terms. My handwriting marked every extension request, every time they had to renegotiate because our side missed a target. Without me pushing, those deals would have crumbled. I reached for my laptop and logged into an old archive drive. Not officially active anymore, but I still had access through mirrored backups. Within minutes, I was scrolling through internal reports, financial statements, client updates, audit logs. The pattern emerged quickly. Dates didn't line up. Penalties that should have been recorded were instead adjusted. Whole weeks of production delays quietly erased from the logs. It was sloppy. Thomas and Gray were painting a picture of flawless performance, but the cracks were obvious to anyone who knew where to look. I took screenshots, saved files, backed everything up to an encrypted folder. Evidence wasn't just leverage, it was survival. If they suspected I was moving against them, I needed to be ready. Around midnight, I paused to pour another drink. The city lights blinked outside my window, and for the first time in days, I felt a sharp edge of satisfaction. They thought they had erased me, but the truth was still written in black ink. One detail caught my eye. A renewal clause buried in the Helios contract. All compliance audits must be independently verified before contract extension. I had written that clause myself, insisting on it when Richard thought I was being too cautious. Now it was my weapon. If Helios demanded verification, Mercer and Hart would be exposed. The fake numbers, the buried penalties, the timeline lies, they would all surface. And Thomas wouldn't survive the fallout. I leaned back, staring at the claws, my pen tapping against the page. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about leverage. Whoever controlled Helios controlled the future of Mercer and Hart. The sound of my phone buzzing cut through the silence. Another message. This time from a blocked number. Only a single line. We should talk. I have information about Thomas. No name. No signature. Just the promise of another crack in the empire. I saved the message, slipped the phone into my pocket, and closed the notebook. The paper trail was clear. The game board was set. And now new players were starting to show their hands. By morning I decided. Sitting on evidence wasn't enough. If I wanted control, I had to move. And the first move had to be Helios. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number. Not Martin Keller, not yet. Too obvious. Instead, I called his chief operations officer, Karen Liu. We'd shared more late-night conference calls than I could count. She trusted me. She also hated wasted time. The line clicked. Karen Liu. Karen, it's Diana Mercer. There was a pause. Not long, but enough to sting. Diana. I heard about the transition. Of course she had. Everyone had. Yes, I said evenly. That's why I'm calling. I'd like to meet. Off the record. Another pause, then a sharp inhale. Diana, you're not with Mercer and Hart anymore. You know how this looks. I do. And that's exactly why you should hear me out. For a moment I thought she'd hang up. Then her tone shifted. When? Today. Anywhere you choose. She gave me an address. A small private conference suite in Midtown. No corporate banners, no logos. Just neutral ground. Perfect. Karen was waiting when I arrived. No entourage, just a laptop and a cup of black coffee. She didn't waste time on greetings. Martin already met with you, she said flatly. I didn't bother denying it. And he respects you. But respect doesn't equal contracts. You know that. I do. Which is why I brought this. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were selected pages from the compliance logs. Deadlines missed, penalties hidden, numbers adjusted. Not everything. Just enough to show the rot. Karen flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. Then she closed the folder. If this is real, it's explosive. It's real. And it's only the surface. Without me, Mercer and Hart can't keep this contract clean. You know it, and Martin knows it. Karen leaned back. What do you want, Diana? I smiled slightly. What I've always wanted. Results. For Helios. And I can deliver them. The question is, do you want to keep tying your future to a rookie CEO and a desperate board? She didn't answer. But she didn't walk out either. That was enough. She gathered the folder, stood and said, I'll be in touch. Then she left, no handshake, no goodbye. Back at home, I placed the phone on the table and waited. Every deal in my life had come down to this stage, the silence between moves. That's when leverage builds. Hours later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. A voice message this time. I pressed play. A man's voice, low, urgent. You don't know me, but I know what Thomas is hiding. Call me back before he buries it. The message ended. I sat still, my pulse steady, my mind calculating. Another angle. Another secret. Another weakness. Helios wasn't the only crack in their walls. My son was hiding something. And whoever this man was, he just handed me the next key. The message replayed in my head all night. You don't know me, but I know what Thomas is hiding. I had heard plenty of threats in my career, but this wasn't a threat. It was leverage knocking on my door. By morning, I dialed the number. A man answered on the second ring. Voice rough like gravel. Mercer. Yes. You want details, we meet. Today. Neutral ground. 7 o'clock. Bring no one. Then he hung up. No name. No hint of motive. Just instructions. At 7 o'clock sharp, I walked into a nearly empty parking structure on the east side. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete. My heels echoed with every step. A figure leaned against a black sedan, hood up, face in shadow. Mrs. Mercer, he said. Thanks for coming. Your message was vague, I replied. I don't deal in riddles. He pulled back the hood. Mid-40s, lean, sharp eyes. Name's Alan Reed. Used to run internal audits at Mercer and Hart. Until I pushed too hard. I studied him. Fired most likely. Maybe bitter. But bitterness breeds truth. What do you have on Thomas? I asked. Alan glanced around the garage before sliding a folder across the hood of his car. Expense reports. Unauthorized transfers. Personal accounts. I opened the folder. Page after page of numbers, signatures, and payments that didn't match. Shell companies, inflated invoices. Money bleeding out of Mercer and Hart like an open faucet. Embezzlement, I said quietly. Alan nodded. Gray knows. The board pretends not to. But it's there. Millions, Diana. And if Helios finds out their partner's new CEO is moving money offshore. He's finished, I cut in. Alan's jaw tightened. I tried to warn the compliance committee. They buried it. I lost my job. Thomas kept his. You think that's coincidence? I closed the folder and looked at him. Why bring this to me? Because you're the only one who can use it. And because I want payback. I didn't trust him. But I didn't need to trust him. All I needed was the truth in those numbers. And if the documents held up, this wasn't just a crack in Thomas's armor. It was a breach wide enough to sink him. Alan stepped closer. Careful, Mrs. Mercer. If Thomas suspects he won't play nice. Blood ties won't save you. I gave him a cold smile. They already didn't. We parted without shaking hands. Back in my condo, I spread Alan's folder across the table beside my notebooks. Compliance lies, financial fraud, a desperate CEO. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place. Helios had already shown doubt. Now I had proof that my son's empire wasn't just fragile, it was rotten. And the next move? Timing it so the board, the market, and Thomas himself would see the truth all at once. But before I could plan, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't an unknown number. It was Martin Keller. And his message was simple. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. My office. Bring everything. The morning I stepped into Martin Keller's office, the storm had already begun. I didn't even need to say a word. The look on his assistant's face told me the news had hit Mercer and Hart before I arrived. Diana, Keller said, motioning me inside. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Helios sent preliminary questions to Thomas yesterday. Specific ones. About compliance. About timelines. About penalties. I raised an eyebrow. And his answers were garbage. Vague. Evasive. My board flagged it immediately. They want clarity. I placed Alan Reed's folder on his desk. Then give them this. Independent proof. Not doctored reports. Not excuses. Facts. Keller opened the folder, flipping through the pages. Every line was a bullet aimed at Thomas's credibility. After 5 minutes, he closed it and exhaled slowly. If this goes public, your son's finished. He's already finished, I said. The question is whether you let him drag you down with him. Keller's eyes locked on mine. You want me to cut him off? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Meanwhile, inside Mercer and Hart headquarters, panic was spreading like fire in dry brush. I still had eyes in the building, junior managers who remembered what loyalty really meant. One of them, Sophie Lane, called me from the stairwell between meetings. Diana, it's chaos. Helios is demanding a third-party audit. Thomas is furious. He's been yelling at everyone since 7 this morning. Gray is trying to calm the board, but they're spooked. Investors are calling nonstop. I could almost hear the fear in her voice. Stay calm, Sophie. Do your job. Watch everything. And keep me updated. Her breath hitched. Diana, they know you're behind this. Good, I said coldly. That means they're paying attention. By noon, the company's stock had slipped 3%. Not catastrophic, but enough to trigger alarms on trading floors. Analysts started whispering. Competitors circled like sharks. Thomas responded the only way he knew how, by calling a full staff meeting. He stood on stage in the auditorium, sleeves rolled up trying to project confidence. This is nothing, he declared. Routine. A minor audit. Mercer and Hart remained stronger than ever. I wasn't there, but Sophie relayed every word. She also told me the truth. His voice shook. His hands trembled when he gripped the podium. Gray sat in the front row, stone-faced, as if daring anyone to question the script. But scripts don't hold when the numbers don't add up. Back in my condo, I watched the ticker scroll across the news channel. Mercer and Hart faces audit questions. 3 minutes of airtime, just a blip. But blips turn into waves if you know where to push. And I knew exactly where. The clause in the Helios contract wasn't just a requirement. It was a countdown clock. Once the audit started, the lies Thomas and Gray had buried would surface. Every penalty, every inflated report, every offshore transfer. The house of cards was already trembling. All I had to do was wait for the right gust of wind. The next morning I met Linda Park in her law office. Sleek glass walls, silent assistants, the kind of place that smelled of money and precision. Linda wasn't one for small talk. She motioned me into a private conference room, shut the door, and dropped a thick binder on the table. "Let's get to it," she said. I opened the binder. Inside were contracts, highlighted passages, sticky notes marking key clauses. She had already dissected the Helios agreement. "You wrote this clause yourself, didn't you?" she asked, tapping the page. I nodded. 15 years ago. Richard thought I was being paranoid. But paranoia keeps you alive in this business. The clause read, "All renewals contingent upon independent third-party audit of performance and compliance records." Linda looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "If Helios invokes this, Mercer and Hart can't hide. The adjusted reports, the missed deadlines, the cooked numbers, it all comes out." "Exactly. And once it does, their stock collapses. Their lenders panic. The board turns on Thomas." "Exactly." Linda leaned back, studying me. "You're not just looking for leverage. You're planning to take them down." I didn't correct her. She sighed, then snapped the binder shut. "All right. Here's what we do. Helios needs a formal trigger. I'll draft a letter, carefully worded, advising them of their contractual right to an independent audit. You don't sign it, they do. That keeps you clean." I allowed myself a thin smile. "That's why I came to you." Linda gave me a sharp look. "Be ready, Diana. This isn't just corporate chess. Once this hits, Gray will know you're behind it. He won't stay polite. Neither will I." Later that afternoon, Sophie Lane called again from inside headquarters. Her voice was low, urgent. "The board's nervous. Some members are already questioning Thomas's decisions. But Gray keeps shutting them down. He's controlling the narrative." "Let him," I said. "Narratives crumble when facts surface." "Diana," she whispered, "I think he suspects me. If he finds out I'm talking to you, you'll be fine." I cut her off. "Stay in the shadows. Keep your head down. When the time comes, you'll be on the right side of this." She didn't sound convinced, but she agreed. That night, Linda sent me a draft of the letter. Clean. Professional. Ruthless. If Helios signed it, Mercer and Hart's facade would collapse in weeks. I stared at the draft on my laptop screen, the words glowing like a fuse waiting to be lit. For 35 years, this company had been my life. Now it was my weapon. And the detonation was about to begin. Sophie Lane asked me to meet outside the office late evening, a diner 2 blocks from headquarters. She came in looking over her shoulder, hair pulled back, coat buttoned up. She sat across from me and didn't waste time. "Thomas is panicking. He's holding private calls with Gray. The board is split. Half think he's fine, half are waiting for proof to cut him loose. If Helios demands the audit, he's done." "Good," I said. "What else?" She slid a flash drive across the table. "Internal memos. Drafts of reports before Gray's edits. You'll see the changes. Deadlines erased, penalties hidden. If this goes public, the company takes a direct hit." I pocketed the drive. "Why are you giving this to me, Sophie?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I'm tired of watching him ruin everything you built. And because if Mercer and Hart goes down, I don't want to go with it." She leaned closer. "But you need to know Gray is moving against you. He's got people digging into your contacts. If they link you to Keller or Helios, they'll try to bury you in court." "Then they'd better not find anything," I said flatly. Sophie nodded, but her hands shook as she lifted her coffee cup. She was nervous, but she had chosen a side. That was enough. I left the diner with the flash drive burning in my pocket like live ammunition. At home, I plugged it into my laptop. She was right. The memos told the story clearly. Sloppy lies cleaned up into polished reports. The kind of edits that kill credibility once exposed. With Reed's financial records, Keller's doubts, Linda's letter, and now Sophie's proof, I had everything I needed to crush them. The only missing piece was timing. And timing in business is everything. My phone buzzed again. A new message. This time not from Helios, not from Reed, not from Sophie. It was from Thomas. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. My office. Don't make me come find you." Thomas's office was bigger than mine ever was. Glass walls, new furniture, skyline view. A stage, not a workplace. He didn't stand when I entered. just leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Mother. Thomas. You've been busy, he said. Keller. Lou. Even Sophie. Don't deny it. I know. I sat down across from him. Then you know your numbers don't hold. His jaw clenched. You think you're smarter than me. You always did. But this is my company now. You don't belong here. You're right, I said. I don't belong here. Neither does your fraud. That hit. His eyes flicked just for a second. Guilt. Fear. Then anger. Careful what you accuse me of. I don't accuse. I prove. Helios has the clause. They'll use it. When they do, your cooked reports won't survive an audit. He leaned forward. You'd burn your own son to the ground? I didn't flinch. I didn't raise you to steal. If you collapse, that's on you. Silence stretched. Outside the glass wall, staff pretended not to stare. Finally, he forced a smile. You can't win. Gray has the board. The lawyers. The investors. Gray has panic, I said. And panic spreads faster than loyalty. I stood, leaving him behind his oversized desk. He wanted the last word but couldn't find it. At the elevator, I glanced back once. He was still sitting there, hands gripping the armrests, eyes fixed on me. He knew I wasn't bluffing. And he knew the audit was coming. 2 days later, the news broke. Helios Energy formally requested an independent audit of Mercer and Hart. One line in a press release, but it hit like a hammer. By noon, the stock was down 8%. Trading floors buzzed. Analysts questioned Thomas's leadership on live television. Words like instability and exposure started circulating. Inside the company, panic escalated. Sophie texted me. Gray furious. Board emergency session. Investors calling non-stop. On TV, Thomas gave a statement. We welcome transparency. Mercer and Hart has nothing to hide. His voice was calm, but the footage betrayed him. Tight jaw, clipped tone, eyes darting. Markets don't trust fear. Gray tried damage control. He called major shareholders, promised stability, swore the audit would clear them. But investors had already seen the drop. Fear feeds on itself. I watched from my condo, remote in hand, ticker crawling red across the bottom of the screen. Everything I'd set in motion was unfolding, exactly as planned. The audit wasn't just a process. It was a countdown. Every day, every headline, every leak would pull Mercer and Hart closer to collapse. By evening, rumors spread. Blogs speculated about fraud. Reporters waited outside headquarters. Employees whispered about layoffs. And in the middle of it all, Thomas, CEO by title but already drowning. The house of cards had started falling. And I wasn't finished. The phone rang close to midnight. Thomas. I let it buzz twice before answering. His voice was sharp, almost breaking. What the hell are you doing? Watching the news, I said. Same as everyone else. Don't play games. Helios doesn't move without you. Keller doesn't push unless you're behind it. Silence on my end. It rattled him more than words. You're destroying me, he said. Your own son. No, I replied. You're destroying yourself. I'm just not covering for you anymore. Breathing heavy on the other line. Then. You think you've won? Gray will bury you in court. He's already building the case. You'll be finished. I built this company, Thomas. I know where everybody is buried. Do you really want to test me? He didn't answer. The silence was thick, only his breathing audible. Finally he snapped. If you ruin this deal, you ruin everything. The board, the investors, the name. You ruin Mercer. I let the words hang before saying, cold and flat. No, Thomas. You ruined Mercer the moment you chose greed over the truth. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. His panic was clear. And panic meant mistakes. Mistakes I would use. Martin Keller's office overlooked the river. Floor-to-ceiling glass, silence heavy with money. He didn't bother with greetings. Diana, he said. My board wants security. If Mercer and Hart collapses mid-project, we take the hit. That's not acceptable. I placed a folder on the table. Inside, my proposal. Lean clear, no fluff. Independent consultancy, I said. I step in directly. My team manages delivery. Compliance guaranteed. You bypass Thomas. You bypass Gray. You deal with me. Keller flipped through the pages. And you expect me to shift a $480 million contract off the books of your own company? My former company, I corrected. And yes, because without me they'll fail. You know it. I know it. The market already knows it. He tapped the folder with one finger. What do you want in return? Formal recognition. A preliminary agreement. Public enough to shake the ground under them, private enough to protect you until the audit ends. Keller leaned back, studying me. Then he gave a single nod. Done. Draft it. My legal team will review tonight. Just like that. $500 million redirected. I felt no triumph. Only clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was execution. Keller slid the folder back. One warning, Diana. Once this leaks, Mercer and Hart will come at you with everything. Gray, the board, even Thomas. They won't fight fair. I don't need fair, I said. I need results. We shook hands. His grip was firm, final. Walking out of his office, I checked my phone. Sophie had sent another message. Gray suspects Keller. He's calling an emergency board meeting tonight. They're desperate. Perfect. Desperation makes men sloppy. And sloppy was exactly what I needed. The boardroom at Mercer and Hart was on fire, though not literally. Sophie called me from the stairwell again, whispering into the phone. They're falling apart, she said. Gray's shouting, Thomas is pacing like a caged animal. The audit letter hit the wires this morning. Investors want answers. Helios won't return calls. What's the board doing? I asked. Half want to back Thomas. The others want him out. But no one wants to be the first to move. Classic corporate paralysis. No courage until the numbers force it. By noon, the first cracks appeared. 3 senior managers were dismissed, scapegoats. Public memo. Restructuring for efficiency. Private reality. Panic cuts. Employees flooded LinkedIn with nervous posts. Recruiters smelled blood. A company that once looked untouchable suddenly looked weak. Gray tried to hold control. He called shareholders, promised the audit would pass. But word was already spreading. Rumors of hidden debts, offshore accounts, missing funds. On trading floors, Mercer and Hart's ticker bled red. Down 15% in 2 days. Thomas finally broke silence with a statement to the press. This company is stable. We are confident in the audit process and look forward to proving our strength. But I saw the footage. His voice trembled. The markets did too. At home, I watched with quiet focus. This wasn't luck. This was pressure applied at the right points. And it was working. That evening, Sophie sent me one more update. Board meeting ended in chaos. Gray wants legal options against you. Thomas wants to deny everything. No consensus. They're cracking. I set the phone down and leaned back. The company I built was collapsing under my son's hands. And the real blow hadn't even landed yet. Gray made his move first. Mercer and Hart filed a lawsuit against me within 48 hours. Allegations. Interference, breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of client relationships. Standard intimidation tactics. I expected it. Linda Park expected it more. We sat together in a polished conference room. Her team reviewing the complaint. She closed the binder with a snap. They're bluffing. They don't have the evidence. They don't need evidence, I said. They need noise. Linda smirked. Then we'll give them silence. And facts. 2 weeks later, we faced them in court. Gray sat behind Thomas, whispering in his ear. Thomas avoided my eyes. Their attorney opened with fire. Accusations of betrayal, family disloyalty, unethical competition. Words meant for headlines, not for the judge. Linda stood calm, papers in hand. Your Honor, this is simple. Mercer and Hart agreed to an independent audit with Helios Energy. That audit uncovered discrepancies. Missed deadlines, hidden penalties, falsified reports. My client, Mrs. Mercer, had no involvement in these issues. In fact, she left the company before they occurred. She dropped the first exhibit on the desk. Internal memos. Drafts versus final reports. Dates circled in red. Then came Alan Reed's records, unauthorized transfers, offshore accounts tied to Thomas's signature. The judge skimmed, eyebrows rising. The silence in the room was louder than any argument. Gray leaned toward Thomas, whispering furiously. Thomas's face drained of color. Linda finished clean. This case is baseless. The evidence shows not misconduct by my client, but misconduct by the plaintiff's leadership. The judge didn't deliberate long. Motion to dismiss granted. Case thrown out. I walked past Thomas as we exited. He looked at me, jaw tight, hands shaking. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't a fight he could win in boardrooms or courtrooms. This was a fight he was destined to lose. The confirmation came in an email. Short, clinical, impossible to misinterpret. Mrs. Mercer, Helios Energy is pleased to confirm execution of our preliminary agreement with Mercer Consulting Group. Effective immediately, your firm will assume oversight of all compliance and delivery functions. Regards, Martin Keller. I read it twice, then a third time. It was real. Signed. Stamped. Irreversible. $500 million in revenue shifted with one document. That afternoon, the press release hit the wires. Helios Energy restructures partnership. Names Diana Mercer as lead consultant. Mercer & Hart stock fell 21% in a single trading session. Investors fled. Creditors demanded guarantees the company couldn't provide. By evening, the board called an emergency meeting without Thomas. Inside headquarters, Sophie reported chaos. Executives shouting, assistants crying, Gray slamming doors. Staff were already polishing resumes. Thomas tried to hold on. He called journalists, issued statements, begged investors for patience. None of it mattered. Numbers speak louder than words. And the numbers were brutal. By nightfall, the board made its decision. Thomas Mercer was removed as CEO. Effective immediately. Gray tried to salvage his position, but with the stock collapsing and the flagship client gone, his influence evaporated. Sophie's final text that night was blunt. It's over. They voted. Thomas out. Gray out. Company finished. I closed my phone, sat at my kitchen table and exhaled slowly. 35 years of work had been stolen, twisted, nearly destroyed. But in the end, the empire I built was mine again, just not in the form they expected. Helios was secured. My consultancy was real. Mercer & Hart was ashes. The board underestimated me. Thomas betrayed me. Gray tried to erase me. Now they were all gone. The morning after Thomas's removal, the headlines said it all. Mercer & Hart implodes. CEO ousted amid audit scandal. Helios Energy walks away. I didn't need to read the details. I already knew. The empire was gone. I sat in the same kitchen where, weeks earlier, I had stared at my box of belongings and thought it was the end. Now the same table held signed agreements, new contracts, and a phone buzzing with calls from clients who suddenly wanted to talk to me again. Thomas? Silent. Gray? Silent. The board? Scrambling to survive lawsuits and shareholder fury. For me it was simple. I wasn't interested in revenge speeches or dramatic declarations. I was interested in results. And the results were clear. I walked away with the money, the client, and the future. They underestimated me. They thought I was old, irrelevant, finished. Instead, I proved what they should have remembered all along. Experience beats arrogance every single time. And now to you. You've watched how my son and his allies erased me, only to destroy themselves. Tell me, when family turns corporate and betrayal mixes with business, can blood ever excuse failure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading. Remember, every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on this story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.